finish, nice and open, and they can make sure of a good finish.
A bonus for off-road competitors is that they get to see some marvellous African bush sunrises. You need something to compensate for the early morning starts that are a feature of off-road racing, and it was a chilly band of officials, competitors, service crew and enthusiasts who braved the early morning cold for the start on the outskirts of Mafikeng. First to come under starters' orders were time trial winners Hannes Kobler and Richard Leek in the Nissan Hardbody. They were followed by the Dark Dog Raceco of John Weir Smith and Bucks Carolyn, who were the first of the special vehicles in the time trial. While Weir Smith and Carolyn set off in pursuit of Kobler and Leek, it didn't take long to realise that dust in the northwest province was going to be a major problem for crews. Back at the start, current production vehicle championship leaders Neil Woolrich and Kenny Scholthammer were waiting to get underway in the factory Mitsubishi Pajero. Cars were scheduled to leave at 1-minute intervals, with final results at the end of the day calculated on corrected time. Strategy for Woolrich and Scholthammer centered around a steady start, with the pair not taking any early risks. The Castrol Toyota Land Cruiser pair of Oppie Reinicker and Robin Houghton were expected to take a more aggressive approach, and behind them, Shamir Variawa with mechanic Zahir Bodhanya. Alongside him, in place of Bucks Carolyn, signalled his early intentions in the Cornbake Jimco. Behind Variawa and Bodhanya, there was an early change in the running order, with the Raceco in the hands of Greg and Fred Dowse moving ahead of Toyota Desert race winners Mark Corbett and Juan Moore. Corbett and Moore finished ahead of the Dowse brothers in the time trial, but were having problems in the dust. Chasing after the two special vehicles were Cliff Barker and Vic Camphor in the Quadrishaw Land Rover, and hot on their heels were Jacques Joubert and Donnie Smith, who were making a welcome return to off-road racing in the ubiquitous 4x4 VW Beetle. Next up were Bevan Berthold and Atang Mahakhaneni in the Speed Stick Raceco, with the pair looking for their second win of the season. Into an early lead in Class E were Castrol Toyota pair Chris and Andrew Birkin, with race cam action from the Toyota indicating that the McRib 400 was also going to be a high-speed affair. A good scrap was starting to develop in Class E, with the Birkins running ahead of Jean-Pierre Joubert and Errol Hodgson in a privately entered Toyota Hilux. Right behind Joubert and Hodgson were Noel and Robin Quinn in the Mitsubishi Pajero, and the Class E battle lines had quickly been drawn. Frick Mulder and Willy Jourdan in the mean-looking Jojo Tank's Chev running in Class T were a little over-enthusiastic, and as a result briefly strayed from the route. No harm done, but the pair were destined to eventually number among the non-finishers. In the dry and dusty conditions, Mulder and Jourdan weren't the only crew to be given a little early race wake-up call. Glenn Eccles and former motorcycle track star Dave Estman decided to test the brakes on the Dark Dog WPP-12 with crew and vehicle, then disappearing in a cloud of Northwest Province dust. There was also a little late braking at the same spot from Renier and Alex van Rooyen, who were quickly back on the route. An error in judgment from Class D contenders Hein Hrobbeler and Charles Volnorans also served as a reminder that in the heat of battle, mistakes were all too easy to make. At the front of the field, Hannes Hrobbeler and Richard Leek were charging along in the Nissan Hardbody and held a handy lead over Neil Woolrich and Kenny Scholthammer. It was an impressive first outing for the Nissan, but when the power steering failed and forced Hrobbeler and Leek to call it a day, the steady Woolrich and Scholthammer were back in a familiar role as race leaders. Unlike the new Nissan, the factory Mitsubishi Pajero is a race-proven vehicle, but the experienced crew were still not prepared to take unnecessary risks. The production vehicle championship leaders were going along steadily, but behind them, special vehicle leaders Shamir Variawa and Zahir Bodhanya were in attack mode after a puncture cost them time. That forced the pair to move along their Cornbake Jimco ahead of Cliff Barker and Vic Camphor in the Quadrishaw Land Rover. Racecam action is from the Mitsubishi Colt of Enzo Kuhn and Francois Jourdan. The pair were running second in Class D, and true to form, the McRib 400 was turning into a high-speed affair. Sections of the route were a little rough and called for caution, but there were no problems at this stage for Kuhn and Jourdan. The same could not be said of father and son pair of Bodo and Gary Bertholdt, who were having a tough time of it in the Raceco. The Raceco had been reduced to running with only third and fourth gear, and the Bertholdts were being closed down by Cliff Wiekelt and Johan Smelberger in the privately entered Toyota Land Cruiser. Jean-Pierre Joubert and Errol Hodgson now led Class E, but there were problems for a stranded Nick Harper and Andrew Chalupsky.
We're not sure if the CV or gearbox lost drive, total drive in there. Making noise, it's going fine.
Harper was making a welcome return to off-road racing, but that was as far as the Rock Oil race car was going to go, and the bush can be a lonely place for stranded off-road racers. By way of contrast, there was plenty of activity up at the service point at the end of the first loop. Cars were coming and going at a rapid rate, while for others there were stops that varied in duration, and that depended on how long it took to repair damage to battered vehicles. Already out of the race were Hannah Squabler and Richard Leake, with other crews struggling with various problems. John Weir-Smith and Bucks Carolyn had dropped back with gear selection problems, and a broken steering wheel was hampering the Castrol Toyota Land Cruiser of Oppie Reinecker and Robin Houghton. They'd purloined a replacement off a reluctant spectator, while Bodo and Gary Berthold were stuck in the service area for over an hour repairing gearbox damage. For an outside observer, the service area was organized chaos, but for competitors and service crew, just another day at the office. It wasn't turning into a happy day for the Berthold family, with Bevan Berthold and Atang Makakhaneni being towed into the pits. Camille de Villiers was still running in his off-road debut, and time-wise, there was not much to choose between the front-runners in both the special vehicle and production vehicle categories. We'll be back with all the mud, sweat and gears of the Maghrib for